Okay. I'm so tired. But it's alright. Coffee and I'm ready to go. Hey friends, welcome back to Theology of the Body, or The Body Reveals God. This video is over chapter 3, The Man of Concupiscence and Lust. It's been a long time since my last videos and life has just been crazy, but we're going to go ahead and get moving, and I'm excited about this chapter. It is a lot, it's really long. I tried to make an outline and it was taking so much time, I was like, nah, I'm just going to get started. So if I start to seem a little disorganized, that's why. But the first thing that we think of with the man of concupiscence and lust, for me, the first thing I think of is our culture. That we're living in a culture of lust. Whether we're talking about magazines or TV shows and movies or music, everything seems to revolve around lust, around enjoying yourself and having a sexual partner rather than a partner for life and a spouse. And you know, we see magazine headlines, especially from like Cosmopolitan and stuff like that, that's like how to add more lust into your relationship or how to add more lust into your marriage. But lust in a marriage, it doesn't belong there. Lust is not good and holy and true. So today we're going to talk about why and what happened after Adam and Eve ate the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, and how that changed us. So remember, we talked about the divine vision last time, how Adam and Eve saw each other both physically and sacramentally. They were able to see the body and the spirit behind it. And what's important is the way we look at others. So John Paul II starts this section with the words of Christ from the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to desire her in a reductive way has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And that's from Matthew 5:27-28. So he's connecting lust with sex, but also with how we look at each other. And John Paul II noticed this, and here's what he said. He said, such a desire to unite with someone who is not one's wife as an interior act expresses itself through the sense of sight, that is, with a look. The relation of desire with the sense of sight was particularly emphasized in Christ's words. So what does that mean? How do we move on from that? So if we sort of draw out the meaning of the text and look at what John Paul II is saying and what's behind that, we can see that he's referring to how Adam and Eve had the divine vision and they lost it to sin. They lost that, and their eyes were open, as Satan said and told Eve, but they were only open to the physical dimension now. They could only see each other's bodies. They had lost sacramental sight. They were not seeing the spirit and the reality behind that of what it means to be created in God's image. So the big word from this author on what sin is reductionistic. She says if she could put one word on a billboard to signify what sin and lust are, it'd be reductionistic. It's reductionistic because we're taking these bodies and souls that are one nature together and we're reducing it just to that physical dimension. That's how Satan tempted Eve to eat the apple. He taught her just to look at the physical dimension. He said it's good for nourishment and it looks nice and it's pleasing to the eye, desirable for gaining wisdom. And he distracted her from what that actually meant and encouraged her to take and use it for her own pleasure and benefit apart from God's design. This is a recurring theme with sin, as we'll see moving on. And John Paul II has a good description for original sin. So here's what it is. It says, the man who picks the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil makes at the same time a fundamental choice and carries it through against the will of the Creator, God Yahweh, by accepting the motivation suggested by the tempter. You will not die at all. Rather, God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will become like God, knowing good and evil. So the next thing the author of this book talks about is a distinction in the Hebrew language versus the English translation. So in Hebrew, there are several different words for to know, just the same way that Spanish and French have one that means to know, like knowledge, and one to know by experience. English doesn't have that. When we read to know, that can mean either way, but the Hebrew word that is used in this chapter of Genesis is to know by experience. So we're talking about how Adam and Eve aren't just going to know good and evil, like know about it intellectually, but they're going to experience good and evil. So, another way to think about that is how Adam knew Eve. He didn't just know her intellectually. He knew her, he was familiar with her because of the union and communion that they shared when they were first created and when they had conjugal union. So, back to original sin, Satan promised Adam and Eve that if they ate the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, they would know good and evil. So the text is implying there that before original sin, Adam and Eve only knew good by experience. They only had experienced good. Because of the divine vision, they perceived the physical dimension and the spiritual reality of everything, and always acted in accordance with God's will for them. They experienced only good. After they ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, everything changed. Now they know evil by experience. They experience the evil of reducing something from its spiritual and physical dimension to just the physical dimension. And they use it for their pleasure apart from God's design. So here's how John Paul II uses it. He's a little more poetic when he talks about this distinction between knowing and experiencing something. He says, by casting doubt in his heart on the deepest meaning of the gift, that is, on love as the specific motive of creation and of the original covenant, man turns his back on God love, on the Father. He in some sense casts him from his heart. At the same time, therefore, he detaches his heart and cuts it off, as it were, from that which comes from the Father, the spiritual reality. In this way, what is left in him is what comes from the world, the physical dimension. This is the 21st century. We're immersed in a reductionistic tendency to consider only what comes from the world. A baby in the womb is not a baby. It's just a clump of cells, a product of conception, something that can be disposed of when it's better for us, in our opinion. And we can do whatever with it according to our own wisdom and benefit apart from God's design. Pornography follows the same pattern. It takes a woman's body, which is made in the image of God, and shows that through union and communion, through sincere, fruitful gift of self, to just a collection of body parts that's airbrushed and seductively exposed, and then used for pleasure and consumption apart from God's design. Masturbation does the same thing with one's own body. You're reducing your body to a physical dimension that is pleasurable just for yourself. God designed the intense pleasure of sexual intimacy with a purpose. It bonds us to the person we experience it with. When it comes to masturbation, even if you're fantasizing about another person, you're really only bonding with yourself. The pleasure of a sexual release is not other-directed as it's meant to be. It's directed to yourself. And that's never God's intention. And this state after original sin is what John Paul II calls historical man. So we had man at the beginning. That's with the divine vision before Adam and Eve ate the apple. And then historical man is after they ate the apple up until our redemption. So with lust, we also have an ever-present twin of shame. With lust comes shame. Genesis 3:6 tells us, then the eyes of both were open, and they realized that they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. But they didn't just clothe themselves because they were seeing each other's naked bodies for the first time. They'd already seen that. Now Adam looks at Eve and only sees her in the physical dimension, though. He doesn't see the spiritual reality behind that. He realizes he can use her body for his own pleasure and benefit apart from God's design. And now Eve looks at Adam and only sees his physical body and sees that she can use his body for her own pleasure against God's design. They cover themselves not because the body is bad, but because they've lost the divine vision. They're afraid. They're afraid that the other is going to use them. They've literally been stripped of the spousal meaning of the body, So when they look at the naked body, it no longer tells them that they are made for union and communion through a sincere gift of self. And they feel exposed. They begin to actually feel naked. John Paul II kind of packs it all into one quote. The author says it's like the cymbals crashing at the apex of a Mozart movement. He said, "The words, 'I was naked, I was afraid because I am naked and I hid myself,' attest to a radical change in this relationship. Man in some way loses the original certainty of the image of God expressed in his body. He also loses in a certain way the sense of his right to participate in the perception of the world, which he enjoyed in the mystery of creation. This right had its foundation in man's innermost being, in the fact that he himself participated in the divine vision of the world and of his own humanity, which gave him a deep peace and joy in living the truth and value meaning of his body." So that whole quote clusters together a lot of the Pope terms that we've talked about, those PTs. Talks about theology of the body reveals God, but no longer, as man loses the original certainty of the image of God expressed in his body. Divine vision, the loss of his right to participate in God's perception of the world and his own humanity, and the spousal meaning of the body, living in the truth and value of his body. So we have another Pope term that we're going to talk about now, and that's the sacramentality of the body. We sort of talked about it, but I haven't defined it for you guys yet. So a sacrament, right, is a visible sign of an invisible reality. It has both a physical dimension and a spiritual reality. If the body is sacramental, then it is a visible sign of an invisible reality. So what is this invisible reality of which the body is a sign? So in the universe, there are three types of persons: divine persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit; spiritual persons, angels, and then there's embodied persons, us, humans. Sometimes we forget that angels are persons. They have an intellect and a will, but no body. So therefore, angels are not sacramental, but we are. This is the joy, not the burden, of being a human person, an embodied person, or even better yet, a sacramental person. As John Paul II is fond of saying, the body expresses the person. The body, which is what you can see, expresses you, your personhood, and your soul, which we can't see directly. And here's a little side note. When Adam encounters Eve for the first time, JP2 paraphrases Adam's exclamation of delight by saying, "Look, a body that expresses the person." In the next sentence, JP2 then says, "This body reveals a living soul." So, even Adam it's talking about how Adam, his joy at seeing Eve is because there's another embodied person for him to have union and communion with. So, the deepest truth of our personhood is that we are made in the image and likeness of God. Our body is doubly sacramental. It's a visible sign of both the invisible you and the invisible Trinity. When someone meets you at the grocery store or the gym or a business meeting, they should not only experience your person through your body, but they should also encounter God through you. So original sin, rather, actually functions like a jackhammer. It rips apart the original unity between body and spirit. Once sin enters the picture, the body has difficulty expressing the spirit, and we then struggle to reveal God. JP2 describes the body-spirit rupture in this way. He says, "These words, 'I was afraid because I am naked,' reveal a certain constitutive fracture in the human person's interior, a breakup, as it were, of man's original spiritual and somatic unity, or spirit and body. He realizes for the first time that his body has ceased drawing on the power of the spirit, which raised him to the level of the image of God." Instead of harmony and unity between the body and spirit, there's discord. And there's a musical analogy here. So most musical pieces have a melody line and a harmony line. So for this analogy, think of the melody line as the body and the harmony line as the spirit. The two are distinct, but when combined the way the composer intended, they sound as one, interwoven with a beautiful complementarity, each one drawing out the beauty of the other. But let's imagine that you separate the two parts and play them unrelated to each other so the timing is off. Yikes! You'd want to cover your ears because that the music would not sound good. It would be disjointed and disintegrated. It's not the way the composer designed the relationship between melody and harmony. And that's similar to what happened between the body and the spirit. Sin took our harmony line and sort of just kicked it off so that we are no longer in time with each other. The two are no longer in time. And it hurts. The conflict is now it's now within our own being. That's not the way that the divine composer designed the relationship between body and spirit. Instead, it's discord and disintegrated. St. Paul wrote about this interior conflict in Romans chapter 7. He said, I cannot even understand my own actions. What happens is that I do not the good I will to do, but the evil I do not intend. Even though I want to do what is right, a law that leads to wrongdoing is always ready at hand. My inner self agrees with the law of God, but I see in my body's members another law at war with the law of my mind. So, for a little thought experiment, close your eyes and imagine yourself in your bedroom before a full-length mirror, completely naked. Can you see yourself in all the glory of your birthday suit? What's your first reaction? Do you want to run and hide? Do you want to cover yourself up? Do you feel shame, embarrassment, or shock? Or is it, hey, my body reveals God. Look at that true, good, and beautiful body. For most of us, we're probably looking at ourselves naked in a full-length mirror with at least some measure of shame. Shame because we see our naked body only as a naked body. We fail to see a body that reveals God and one that has a spiritual dimension with a sacramental significance. Instead, we're hearing just the melody line, and the harmony line is completely left out. It's just not even there. As a result, JP2 makes the fascinating connection between shame and concupiscence and lust. He says, man is ashamed of his body, not because the body is bad, but because of concupiscence and lust. So in his spiral thought method, here's exactly what he says. Man has shame of the body because of concupiscence. More exactly, he is shamed not so much because of the body, but more precisely of concupiscence. He is shame of the body, motivated by concupiscence. Man is ashamed of his body owing to concupiscence, because concupiscence/lust reduces the body to just its physical dimension, so it can be used for one's own pleasure and benefit apart from God's design. We're ashamed of our bodies because we fear that when others look at us, especially at our naked bodies, they will reduce us to an object for their own desire instead of treating us with impeccable respect as an embodied person made in the image and likeness of God. So this is something that I've struggled with a lot. I think a lot of women specifically struggle with it, and it's not always recognized that men do as well. But our body image issue comes from this rupture. I feel upset about the fat on my tummy because I'm reducing myself just to the physical aspect of who I am. So something that I've actually found recently, apart from this book that has helped a lot in helping my body image, is this little phrase that I just remind myself with when I'm feeling bad. I'll say it to myself a couple times. It's, my physical body is good and holy and was created out of divine love. My physical body is good and holy and was created out of divine love. So when you're feeling hard on yourself and you don't like what you're seeing in the mirror, remind yourself of that. There's a spiritual reality behind that physical body that you can't see and that has been ruptured by original sin, but it's still there. It's not gone. Your physical body is good and holy and was created out of divine love. So, moving on. There are actually going to be 4 consequences from original sin that emerge, like lions claiming their territory. So first, when God arrives after Adam and Eve eat of the fruit, they immediately hide. Adam and Eve go hide in the bushes. And it's not an innocent game of hide and seek. It's a visual image of the rupture between God and humanity. So that's rupture number 1. Second, God details the fallout of their actions by explicitly pinpointing relational conflict between man and woman. Your desire shall be for your husband, but he will dominate you. Genesis 3:16. In other words, the harmony between man and woman is ruptured. Here are JP2's words. After the breaking of the original covenant with God, men and women did not find themselves united with each other, but rather more divided or even set against each other because of their masculinity and femininity. Above all, therefore, that shame which according to the biblical narrative makes the man and the woman hide their own bodies before each other, and especially their sexual differentiation, confirms that the original power of communicating themselves to each other, about which Genesis 2:25 speaks, has been shattered. Loss of relationship with God and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit results in loss of relationship with one another. But there's still a third consequence to original sin, the rupture between us and created order, or our fruitfulness. Eve will give birth in pain, and Adam will experience the earth resisting his efforts at fertility. So growing crops and food is going to be difficult. The fourth and final consequence has already been noted. That's our internal rupture between body and spirit, which is manifested as bodily shame and ultimately as death. As a result, the body no longer effortlessly reveals God or the person. So a little acronym for that is GO NY, like Go New York. If we put all of those together, that's the acronym we get. Sin ruptured our ability for union and communion with God, others, nature, and within yourself, between body and spirit. So GONY. This is the unfortunate state that historical humanity, which is all of us, find ourselves in. So, another box out here. The Catechism of the Catholic Church calls our state before original sin original justice, which was a sharing in divine life, or union and communion with God. By sharing in this divine life, the Catechism says that Adam and Eve experienced three other harmonies. As long as he remained in the divine intimacy, man would not have to suffer and die. The inner harmony of the person, the harmony between man and woman, and finally the harmony between the first couple and all creation comprise the state called original justice. And those are the four harmonies that we call GONY, or Go New York. So there's this big, dense summary paragraph from John Paul II that covers everything we talked about in this chapter. So instead of reading his direct words, I'm going to read the translation from the author. It says, "Shame destroys the communion of persons. Therefore, if we understand shame, it will help us better understand the body and its ability for union, i.e., its spousal meaning. In order to understand why shame closes us off from each other, we have to understand our original state, our original innocence, where masculinity and femininity told us the meaning of the body, where masculinity, femininity, and the body were sacramental. We're made for union and communion through a sincere gift of self, not only in conjugal union, but also in personal union, or person-to-person communion. The body is the foundational means by which we enter into union and communion with others. We can't make just a spiritual gift of self. It has to be expressed through the body because the body expresses the person. The fact that sexual shame exists, which is losing the divine vision, seeing the body only in its physical dimension, shows that we've lost the inner spiritual conviction that it is through the masculine and feminine body that we enter into communion with others. The primary way we image God in the world is through our sincere gift of self in the body." So there's, the author said she gets a lot of questions about why she uses both union and communion. And union, I can't remember if we've talked about this before in these videos, but union has a more physical connotation. The body is made for union. Structurally, it's designed to become one with another. But communion doesn't always carry the same physical connotation. It emphasizes the spiritual, emotional, and freely chosen bond between people. This is what is distinctly personal in us. We say that God is a communion of persons and that there is a shared union between the three, which is why the author uses both words, to emphasize union and communion on all levels: spiritual, intellectual, emotional, volitional, and physical. So while it would be logical to assume that JP2 is ready to wrap up this analysis of original sin, he's really just getting in the zone. So there's a brief story that she includes here before continuing on that just sets the stage for the rest of the chapter. A local shopkeeper was dismayed when a brand new business, similar to his own, opened up next door and erected a huge sign that said, "Best Deals." He was even more horrified when another competitor opened up on the other side and announced its arrival with an even larger sign that read, "Lowest Prices." The shopkeeper panicked. Then he got an idea. He put the biggest sign of all over his own shop that read, "Main Entrance." So if we think of original sin as being the main entrance, then we can conceptualize two additional shops to the right and left. Those are concupiscence and lust. It's these two stepsisters of original sin that JP2 returns to now. The constant challenge after original sin is living out our God-given desire for personal union. JP2 calls this the perennial attraction between man and woman. It is part of the goodness of creation. The difficulty is that lustful desire, like the Rocky Mountain fog, clouds the meaning of the body. In JP2's words, here are 3 descriptions of this distortion. Concupiscent desire, I would say, is the deception of the human heart with regard to the perennial call of man and woman to communion through a reciprocal gift. Number 2. Concupiscence as a limitation, violation, or complete deformation of the spousal meaning of the body can be observed in a particularly clear way in the first 2 parents. Number 3. Lustful desire has the effect that in the interior, in the heart, in man and woman's interior horizon, the meaning of the body proper to the person itself is obscured. So by acting on this perennial attraction in a lustful manner, the communion of persons is sacrificed on the altar of bodily gratification. So here's JP2's description once again. One can therefore say that on the one hand, the body does not cease to arouse the desires for personal union precisely due to masculinity and femininity. Your desire shall be for your husband. On the other hand, concupiscence itself simultaneously directs these desires in its own way. This is confirmed by the expression, he will dominate you. Now the concupiscence of the flesh directs these desires toward the appeasement of the body, often at the cost of an authentic and full communion of persons. Instead of union and communion through a sincere gift of self, lustful desire zeroes in on one part of God's design. It aims directly toward one and only one end as its precise object, to satisfy only the body's sexual urge. So, like a horse with blinders, concupiscence, or the sexual drive cut off from the father, ignores the spousal meaning of the body and gallops full speed ahead toward enjoying another's body, not as the expression of the person. What results is a collision of 2 bodies in time and space, rather than the sacramental communion of 2 persons. Here's how JP2 says it. Concupiscence, as such, is not able to promote union as a communion of persons. By itself, it does not unite, but appropriates to itself. The relationship of the gift changes into a relationship of appropriation. Concupiscence of itself, however, pushes man toward the possession of the other as an object, pushes him toward enjoyment, which carries with it the negation of the spousal meaning of the body. God made us for love, but the fallen body bullies us toward lust. Instead of union and communion, we have possessions. Instead of gift, we have appropriation, taking and using the other. Instead of a civilization of love, we have a civilization of use. JP2 understood well the cultural shift set in motion by the sexual and communist revolutions. If we understand lust and concupiscence as being open only to that which comes from the world, only to the physical dimension, then it makes sense why the man of lust is incapable of encountering the other as a sacramental person. He's blinded to the full value of the person, preferring instead to appropriate or possess the other, or one's own body, as a body object. This is, once again, on reduction as characteristic of concupiscent lust. JP2, in short, on that, says that lust causes a value blindness. Instead of seeing the body as a sign of the spousal meaning of the body, as an invitation to reciprocal self-giving love, lust provokes the will to satisfy only the sexual urge. And since we live in a sex-saturated society, JP2 doesn't hesitate to emphasize this reductionistic tendency again, later on. He said, the concupiscence that arises as an interior act changes the very intentionality of the woman's existence for the man by reducing the wealth of the perennial call to the communion of persons, the wealth of the deep attraction of masculinity and femininity, to the mere satisfaction of the body's sexual urge. Such a reduction has the effect that the person, in this case the woman, becomes for the other person, the man, above all an object for the possible satisfaction of his own sexual urge. Interestingly, the frontline target of lust and concupiscence isn't only the body, but also the heart. JP2 said, concupiscent desire, I would say, is the deception of the human heart with regard to the perennial call of man and woman to communion through a reciprocal gift, a call that has been revealed in the very mystery of creation. The heart has become a battlefield between love and concupiscence. In his next sentence, JP2 describes the sad but common evolution of the concupiscent heart. The more concupiscence dominates the heart, the less the heart experiences the spousal meaning of the body, and the less sensitive it becomes to the gift of the person. As citizens of this world, in this world, but not of it, we confront this civilization of concupiscence and lust every time we walk out the door, turn on the TV, or stand in line at the grocery store. We bump up against a culture that is increasingly incapable of promoting the true communion of persons because it reduces others to their physical dimension and ignores the spiritual reality of the human person. We relate to each other as bodied objects, not embodied persons. So, increasingly, society, both Christian and secular, has been promoting self-stimulation as normal and natural. Self-stimulation is masturbation. The Catholic Church continues to view this behavior as a grave sin because it objectifies one's own body, as we've talked about. Instead of bonding two persons together in a communion of love, self-stimulation appropriates the intense pleasure of the sexual act and directs it towards oneself. It can also establish a habitual pattern and the expectation that sexual gratification or release should be available on demand, whether one is married, single, or celibate. As a result of this bodily conditioning, abstinence, whether periodic as in marriage or constant as in celibacy and single life, becomes a flashpoint of resentment and bodily tension. Moving on, the rest of this section is more historical and psychological rather than theological. So JP2 looks at the understanding of adultery in the Old Testament and how Jesus shifts the understanding of adultery from a mere physical act to an act of the heart, an act of intention and desire. So before he ends this section, he makes one other distinction between eros and ethos. And Pope Benedict XVI also picked up the same distinction and made it a centerpiece of his first encyclical, God is Love. So more on that. Benedict XVI clearly stated his papal mission. The rich patrimony of JP2's teaching has not yet been assimilated by the Church. My personal mission is not to issue many new documents, but to ensure that his documents are assimilated. So that's from an interview on JP2's legacy in 2005. For the Western psyche, moving back to eros versus ethos, eros is almost exclusively identified with the word erotic. If something is erotic, its purpose is to excite our sexual desire. However, this isn't the original Greek meaning. Eros for Plato was the interior attraction to the transcendent. JP2 said, according to Plato, eros represents the inner power that draws man toward all that is good, true, and beautiful. JP2 and then Benedict XVI both seek to recapture this original meaning of eros and join it to ethos, to what is morally good in the human heart. In a further unfolding of scholastic Catholic thought, JP2 proposes an interior marriage between eros and ethos. He said, in the erotic sphere, eros and ethos do not diverge, are not opposed to each other, but are called to meet in the human heart and to bear fruit in this meeting. What is worthy of the human heart is that the form of the erotic is at the same time the form of ethos, or of that which is ethical. Similarly, Benedict XVI encourages eros to find its full flowering in agape in his encyclical God is Love. For JP2, the fruit of eros and ethos meeting in the human heart is a mature spontaneity based on an intimate knowledge of the impulses of one's own heart. So he sets the stage for our next section by introducing purity of heart. Christ's words about committing adultery in the heart are severe. They demand that in the sphere in which relationships with persons of the other sex are formed, man has full and deep consciousness of his own acts, and above all of his interior acts, and that he is conscious of the inner impulses of his own heart so that he can identify and evaluate them in a mature way. Christ's words demand that in this sphere, which seems to belong only to the body and the senses, that is, to the exterior man, he should succeed in being really an interior man, able to obey right conscience, able to be the authentic master of his own innermost impulses, like a watchman who watches over a hidden spring, and finally be able to draw from all these impulses what is fitting for purity of heart by building with conscience and consistency the personal sense of the spousal meaning of the body, which opens the interior space of the freedom of the gift. For Christians, the human person is not depraved, but deeply wounded. Evil, which JP2 says, is not a constitutive attribute of the human body. However, because of sin, we have lost, among other things, the clear sense of the spousal meaning of the body, in which the interior dominion and freedom of the spirit expresses itself. Our desires become confused. Our impulses demand satisfaction, and when we experience attraction to the opposite sex or sexual arousal, we see no reason not to act on those feelings. In short, JB2 says, the sense of the spousal meaning of the body is in some way confused with concupiscence and easily lets itself be absorbed by it. Is the solution merely to manage our lust? To grit our teeth, avoid our eyes, and wink at lust in marriage as the best we can hope for? To paraphrase St. Paul, who will deliver me from this bondage? Praise be to Christ Jesus. Jesus Christ is the way to purity of heart and the redemption of the body. And that's how we end today. So remember, guys, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. He guides us from that state of historical man into something better, and I can't wait to talk about it with you all next time. So in the meantime, God bless you all, and I hope you all have a great day or a great night, depending on when you're watching this, and keep an eye out for the next video. Who knows when it will be. So, bye!